cold storage, and there's different types of ways to store your cryptocurrency. And so we're going to be talking about the different ways to do that, what's safest, what is worth maybe reconsidering, and all that jazz. So I'm Jessica Levesque. I'm the executive director at C4, and today we are joined by the wonderful Josh McIntyre. So Josh, would you just give us an update on what you've been doing, how we know each other, and all of that jazz?
Yeah, so I'm by day I'm a software engineer at Microsoft. Work on coding, so software and technical stuff is a big interest of mine. On the side, I run Chain Toots, which is a free and open license educational platform, and I make a lot of content about cryptocurrencies, security, and general computer science topics of interest. So always happy to do work with C4. I enjoy being a part of the team.
Yeah, and we met in 2019 because you were one of the teachers at our BTC 2019 conference. And I very much stuck out to me because you did a really engaging session where you used, well, you can explain it better than me, but I found it fascinating because I'm all about education in a way that is informative but also engaging, and you did something that was pretty hands-on. You just explain it, because maybe also I'll find the video and link to it.
Yeah, so for that talk, I was explaining proof of work with a visual demo, and I had little microcontrollers with 8 LEDs on them that would kind of do a toy example of a proof of work algorithm, sort of how miners do hashing and find blocks. And it was just fun. I like to make content that's accessible and engaging to people with different learning styles. So
Yeah, for
that was a
sure.
fun talk.
I talked to somebody yesterday about that's called UDL, Universal Design for Learning. And it's the idea that whenever you do any type of education, I mean, not whenever, but when you can, and you're doing an educational anything, to come up with the different ways that different types of learners can learn the same information, but it's being conveyed in different ways. So like for me, if I'm just listening to a podcast, I'm not going to remember it. Like, it's not going to sink in forever. I really need to be able to see it as well. But some people, if they see things that like just, goes in one ear out the other over their head. So it really is just about meeting people where they're at, which we talked a little bit about that before we went live, in terms of finding some of the content from this session that we're doing and breaking it up and doing some visuals to make it a little bit clearer. So if you're watching this video, you may want to look around. If you're watching it, later or now, just keep an eye on it, because we will be having some different little broken up pieces from it that explains some of the more technical stuff. We're not going too technical, but some of the technical stuff into detail that makes sense if you're a visual learner. So, all right, let's talk about cold storage. Yay. Okay, so I think in order to talk about cold storage, we should back up and just talk about why this matters. And like, if you're a newbie, what is storage? Like, when we talk about storing private keys, what does that mean and how is that different? So maybe we should just back up and explain like what a crypto wallet is.
Yeah, so I mean, a cryptocurrency wallet really, in its essence, is a key storage. So all of our digital assets are balances that, I own 1 Bitcoin, or Jess owns, 0.5 Ethereum or something like that. That balance information is stored in the blockchain. That's a public database shared with everybody that's running Bitcoin or Ethereum software. And those addresses are hashes of a public key. So that's something that is derived from our private keys, our secret keys. And that's really what a wallet stores, is it gives you access to the information that you need to send coins to somebody in the future. We call that signing a transaction.
Yeah, and It seems like, at least for me, when I first started learning about crypto, maybe because I'm not very technical, and by not very, I mean I'm not technical. As I said, that I thought my coworker Erica would be rolling her eyes at the comment that not very, because I'm constantly asking her for help on like those smallest things. But when I first got into crypto and I heard about crypto wallet, my brain immediately went to like the wallets that we're used to, which is something physical that holds it. And then when someone started explaining like, oh no, it's all digital, I was kind of like, oh, but then I realized we're already doing that with fiat. This idea that our actual, US dollars or pesos or whatever is all physical isn't true anyways, because money is being printed and digitized anyhow. And so it is following along with that idea of it just being virtual. But the difference is in how this virtual currency is being held. So is it being just printed willy-nilly by a government and they have say over it, or is it being minted in a way that is structured so that it's not, at the whim of, a handful of people?
Yeah, I mean, most digital, really all digital assets are minted under some structured set of rules that a community agrees on. And every currency is a little bit different, right? Bitcoin has a hard cap of 21 million Bitcoin. And those Bitcoin are subdivisible. So you can have a small fraction of a Bitcoin that you own. Ethereum has a different protocol for that. And that's changed a little bit over time. Different currencies have different hard caps. Some have no hard cap at all. But what makes it interesting is this is all driven by community consensus, right? Everybody that's running Bitcoin or running Ethereum nodes, miners, people that interact with the network, all agree by participating to follow the same set of rules. So it's kind of neat when you first get into Bitcoin, you think, well, what's going to stop me from copying and pasting my wallet file and now having double the money? But the reason that's not true is because your balance, your ownership is the balance of what you own, I should say, is stored on a public database. Everybody's agreeing on what you own. By copying your wallet, all you get is a copy of the same private key that can sign for those coins.
I think that's a good point, because that was also confusing to me. You'll notice a theme, like a lot of things were confusing to me, but I feel like if someone totally outside the tech community, tech education like me, I was an English major. I taught English and communication studies, can come in and begin to understand this. I feel like that just shows that as long as you invest your time in learning and you learn from people who are accurate, you do research, that anybody can begin to understand this. And what you were saying about it being on the blockchain is something that I also found confusing, in that the crypto exists on chain. So it is your private keys that give you access to it. So it doesn't matter how you're storing it, sort of. We'll get into that later. But if you have the private keys to it, anyone can see that crypto, but it lives on the blockchain, not like in an actual wallet that you hold. You can't physically hold it. And that distinction, that it's on the blockchain. So if you have a wallet and you aren't using it anymore, let's say you're using Electrum or you were using Mycelium and you want to switch to Electrum, you're able to switch between types of wallets and you can still keep the same currency because it's not in that wallet, it's on the blockchain. Which, I don't know about you, but that was that when I found that one out, I was like, oh, that makes so much sense in how wallets work to access it, that it's not stored inside of.
Yeah. And it really is interesting how I agree with you, just investing time in it. At least when I was in school a couple years ago, finishing out my computer science degree, there weren't classes on this, right?
Right.
But I got into it because I'm interested in cryptography and open source. So it's kind of cool seeing how things like public key encryption, public key signatures are used for cryptocurrencies.
Well, so let's explain how that works. So we've talked about how crypto is on the blockchain and your private keys give you access to what's on the chain. Do you want to explain just kind of briefly what that means?
Yeah,
You touched on it.
I think my favorite way to describe this is to kind of compare it to traditional credit cards. I mean, I know now we have the chips and stuff, which sort of does get into to signatures, and I'm not super familiar with how that works. But traditionally, when you go to the store and you use your credit card, you swipe that card, and what that does is it allows the merchant to pull from your account. So it's a pull transaction, right? I go to Target, I give Target a private account number, right? You wouldn't want to put your credit card number on a billboard. You would get all of your money stolen, at least until you could freeze it and all those sorts of things. So it's a private piece of information that a merchant pulls from. I like to refer to cryptocurrency transactions as a push mechanism. So let's say I have half a Bitcoin in my address and I want to buy a car from somebody on Craigslist. I am the owner of the Bitcoin on that chain. And instead of me giving a private account number to the person I'm going to pay, they give me their public address. And what I do is I use my private key, which is in my wallet, to essentially sign over ownership of the coins to that person's address. So the signing over of my ownership to their address is the transaction that's recorded on the blockchain. And that uses your private key. You never reveal your private key to do a transaction. The way that this works is that anybody that has the public key can validate that you have signed a message to transfer that ownership, and you don't have to reveal that secret information. I know that's maybe a little bit technical, but I think the general idea here is if I send Bitcoin to Jess, I use my private key to sign that transaction over to her public address, and that transfer, that signature, is what's recorded on the blockchain.
Right. And then I would have to digitally sign to make a transaction to send it back to, which is why when we say that crypto is one way, you can't just send it, you can't just undo a transaction. It's because once it's been sent to me, if it's sent to my public address, I then have the private keys that would allow me to make another transaction and sign for it to go back to you or to someone else. So if you send crypto to, or Bitcoin, let's say, to me, but it's not actually my public address because you type it in wrong and you don't know whose address that is, then you wouldn't be able to have it sent back to you unless you happen to know that person and they were like, oh yeah, I love you, Josh. I'd be happy to send this back to you, which would be awesome. Okay, so now that we understand kind of the underpinnings of this, not super technical, but enough to know, let's talk about the types of cold storage, because we're going to focus on the types of storage, because today we're going to focus on cold storage. But before this, Josh and I were talking about a way to kind of compare cold storage, warm storage, hot storage to something that maybe we're already somewhat familiar with as an analogy. So Josh and I were talking about this idea of an ocean. So you go to the ocean and there's different layers of water. So there's obviously what's right on top, which is like the very easy layer of fishing, which is like you go in, you can pluck the fish out, you see them, it's not tough. But then as it gets deeper, it becomes harder and harder to be able to get things out of the ocean. So like there's that sunlight layer where the fishing is the easiest. Then there's a twilight layer where it's a little more challenging, but still possible to get something out of it, which is like, if you've ever seen, what's that show, Deadliest Catch? It's like crab fishing might not seem that dangerous, and I'm sure they dramatize it, but it is more difficult than just going out with your fishing pole and, catching a trout. And the next layer would be what's called hold on, I looked this up, the midnight layer. And that would be something where it's like Oh, that was the crab. Sorry. Then there's the abyss, which would be something like a squid. And then there's like the trenches, which is that really deep water that's extremely difficult to access if you are a human. So that would be like sea cucumbers, which now I need to learn more about sea cucumbers. But why am I talking about this? So Josh and I were comparing these different layers of the ocean and getting deeper and colder to the different types of wallets. So on the very surface of the ocean, like we said, it's easy to go fishing, it's easy to grab things out of it, and that's the same with a hot wallet. So Josh, do you want to explain what a hot wallet is on kind of like a broad level?
Yeah, well, I love this ocean analogy. I mean, I think this is a great way to explain it because it sort of goes into the idea of both ease of use for the users and sort of the security pitfalls that we have to be aware of. In a broad sense, a warm or a hot wallet is a wallet where you have access to your signing keys on a like general purpose device that's connected to the internet. So in really simple terms, a PC or a mobile phone. Something where you can get right on it and send coins to somebody else without having to like plug in a USB device or, do anything very physical with it. It's just sort of a piece of software on a normal everyday computing device that you would use.
Yeah, and I think there's a reason why there's different levels of custody, different ways to hold your cryptocurrency, because what is easiest is not most secure. So what's easiest for most people is to keep your money on using a custodial service. So this would be where it's the most hot. You don't have more people have access to it. There's easier ways to kind of go fishing to jump in to get it because it's not stored really, really far down deep in the ocean. So one of the things that C4 actually has that our Cryptocurrency Security Standard Committee has come up with is this idea for how, if you're using a custodial service, these custodians should be managing the private keys that they hold for you. So if you're using a custodial service, they have these private keys that Josh was explaining about. And so technically they can authorize the transactions. And you have to trust that they're not going to do this or that they're securing these private keys safely. And if they're not, you really have no way of knowing right now, which is why our CCF standard is out there. And we're working on having auditors go in and take a look at how private keys are being managed so that we as end users can feel safer, because the easiest way is to trust a third party for most people, because it's most similar to current banking where you kind of log in, you've got your regular password, hopefully it's not 123, and then you can go in and you access your funds through this third party. But for those who have a little more technical understanding, and I really think anyone is able to do this, you can go into what Josh was saying with having a mobile wallet where you have access on your phone and it's not logging into this third party in the same way. You're holding the mnemonics to this wallet. So maybe now that I brought up mnemonics, we should explain what the mnemonics are and how we gain access to the funds that we have.
Yeah, so mnemonics came into play several years ago at this point, and really what it is it's just a way of encoding sort of your base private key information. This is 12 to 24 words. There's different lengths of mnemonic that you can have. But if you have that mnemonic, you can derive an unlimited amount of private keys and crypto addresses from them. So it serves as a really easy way to have a human readable backup of your keys. Because, as we talked about before, if you send coins to an address that you don't know, you can't reverse that transaction. And if you are the owner of an address and you lose access to your keys with no backup, you also lose access to the coins because you have to have private keys to sign a transaction. So mnemonics make it much, much easier to back up and use private key data. And a mobile wallet, a cold wallet, anything that's non-custodial will give you one of these to back up and safe keep as a way of accessing your keys.
Yeah, and for people who are kind of getting into cryptocurrency now, a easier time. In some ways, there's a lot more information, these different aspects to it, but in terms of like the simple getting a mnemonic phrase, having a wallet, and having access through those keys, it is, I think, different. Well, I know it's different than, 5-10 years ago, when in order to have access to it, you didn't have like the BIP 39 and BIP 32, and we don't need to go into that right now, but there have been advances in technology that make it easier to store your cryptocurrency using this hierarchical method, so that you don't have to create something new every single time with a new basically password to be able to get into it. And so I personally lost crypto beforehand because it was confusing, and I did not do a good job of backing things up or keeping track of everything. And I think it's a lot easier now. So I'd like to believe that I am no longer going to be losing my own money. But most people I know who have either worked in cryptocurrency or kind of been interested in a while have at some point done something to lose crypto. Have you ever, Josh?
I don't know that I can recall ever losing it, but I've definitely
Okay,
gone
teach me
through
your
different
ways.
wallets.
Give us all your lessons.
It's mostly just like taking time and trying to understand things, I guess, is for
Yeah.
me really coming from the technical side. I was really excited about understanding how things go. I mean, I probably have and don't remember necessarily, but more than anything, I always caution people to take their time and try to understand what you're actually doing. One thing that I have done a lot is transfer to new wallets. I've tried a lot of different mobile wallets, PC wallets, um, even coded up sort of my own demo of a cold storage wallet for a project. And,
Mm-hmm.
it's always about making backups of your keys. It's the most important thing. And just double,
Yeah.
triple checking your addresses before you send is a big one too.
Yeah, that's a good point. The taking time, triple checking things, making sure that you're not kind of rushing through. I was in a meeting with somebody and was going to send them some, and I was like, you know what, hold off. I feel like I have a lot to do right now. We're trying to cram it into this small amount of time, and like that is when the mistakes happen. So like take a beat, schedule it for 15 minutes, do whatever it is that you need to make sure that you're doing it in a safe way. And the upside to this is that you have control, right? The upside to, even though it might seem like, okay, I'm taking extra time, it seems like, tricky, dangerous, but the underneath all of this, if you are custodying your own crypto, if you're holding your own private keys, no one else has access to that. And this is something that is amazing. And I've talked about this before, but Stephanie Murphy has talked about the stairway to self-sovereignty, and this idea that when you take your first step into cryptocurrency, you don't need to know everything. Just sort of peek in, take a step, use a very small amount, and progressively learn. And the more you learn, the more crypto maybe you'll hold, and you can put it in different places. Which, going back to this ocean idea, when you first start, if you have a very small amount and you've got your crypto on a hot wallet and somebody's fishing and you lose it, and I've never lost it that way. I've lost crypto based on my own stupidity, to be frank. But if you're doing it in a way that you're just starting with a small amount, as you dip your toes into the water, then you can sort of safely, as you add more and learn more, become more self-sovereign, and you're gaining this extra knowledge. And from there, you can increase how much. And I think part of it too is, even for those people who have significantly more Bitcoin, which jealous, but for those people who do, I think that a key to it is that the money is being stored in different places based on how much it is. So we talked about this idea of a hot wallet kind of being that top ocean layer. And since it's easier to access it, you would likely store less Bitcoin on it, because if something did happen, you're less likely to, be financially impacted on such a deep level. But as you have more and more, we go down deeper into the trenches and we store it more safely. So why don't we talk about the safest methods of storing crypto and why that is generally, especially for larger amounts, considered cold storage.
Yeah, so what I think we can start first by defining sort of what cold storage is,
Yep.
what cold storage devices look like. Um, Obviously we don't promote any particular brand, but very popular
Mm-hmm.
examples of these would be the Trezor, Ledger, KeepKey hardware wallet devices. But on a more fundamental level, what a cold storage device is, or what cold storage is it's generating and storing your keys offline. So when we were talking about the hard wallet or hot wallet or warm wallet, this is a mobile phone or a PC. It's a general purpose device that's connected to the internet, right? You do all kinds of things on your phone and your laptop. You browse the internet, you work on spreadsheets, do photos and videos. What a cold storage setup is it's some device that generates those keys and keeps those keys offline. So there's no connection to the internet with one of these devices, and you don't store a backup of your seed phrase on a normal computer or your phone. And the reason that we do this is really, really simple. The more stuff you use your warm wallet device for, right? Your PC, your mobile phone, the more avenues there are for an attacker to steal access to your private keys. Computers get viruses, right? There's all kinds of examples of these. Sometimes it's even a little bit easier for somebody to be socially engineered into giving up access to their coins if it's so easy to get on your phone and do something like be tricked into signing a transaction. The cold storage keeps those keys away from a lot of those threats like malware. So that's kind of a high level overview of the general security model behind cold storage.
Yeah, and I like this idea of kind of like as you get deeper into it, you can get deeper. As you get deeper into crypto, you can get deeper into understanding these different ideas, but also creating a wallet using some type of cold storage isn't, I think, as complicated maybe as it originally might seem, because you already have to create a system for storing your mnemonic and your private, which is your private keys, for a warm wallet or a hot wallet as well. So you're doing something similar, you're just doing it in a bit of a different way.
Yeah, exactly. And the really nice thing is now we have these commercial, well vetted, dedicated devices that do this. I mean, people used to
Mm-hmm.
do things like go buy a computer with cash, literally tear out the network card so it wouldn't connect to the internet, install Linux, encrypt the hard drive. You had to be very, very technical to do a cold storage setup. And as folks like
Mm-hmm.
Jamison Lopp will say, even if you are very technical, you have to be really, really aware of some pitfalls of doing your own setup. Nowadays, where we have these commercial devices that have open source software on them that the whole community is looking at, that's really the way to go. And not only is it more secure because of that, but it's also much, much easier for everyone to use.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I like that you brought up this idea of like what Jameson Lopp is saying in terms of like it as it becomes more technical, kind of you need to be aware of what the technical stuff is. And somebody just put a question in here that said, for people that travel a lot, is something like Shamir's secret sharing scheme a good solution? So you can store parts of your mnemonic in different places. So I personally think that the best system for people is the best system that works for you. So if you're super technical, maybe super technical options are better. This is personally something that I have heard is not recommended. It's not the best way to do things. I don't know if you have more thoughts on that, Josh.
Yeah, so it's a great question, and other people have asked this, and other sort of experts in the community, like Andreas, have talked about this. it is
Hmm.
generally not recommended to do any sort of seed splitting scheme. And the reason for this is very simple. You're far more likely to mess up your seed splitting scheme and lose your key data than you are to be physically robbed of your, device or your seed phrase while traveling. Um, a better approach would be, so if you travel with one of these devices like a Trezor or Ledger or KeyKey, the hardware itself is designed in such a way that somebody that steals the device and doesn't have the PIN can't just take the key data from it. So there's a layer of protection right there. The other thing that I would recommend is, don't, because the best way to store a cold storage seed phrase is to only like write it down, engrave it in metal, not put it on a computer, even encrypt it or anything like that, is don't travel with your seed phrase unless you really, really have to. And if you do, if you're concerned about somebody getting access to the 12 to 24 word seed, there is a standard way of adding extra entropy on top of that. Without getting too technical, you can add a password, some additional passphrase, I should say, some additional entropy on top of your seed. So BIP39 passphrases. So if you are in a situation where you need to travel with the key data, the seed, and you're concerned about somebody stealing that, you can add an additional layer on top of that to keep yourself protected. And again, the biggest reason for this is a standard protocol. This is implemented by all the commercial hardware wallets, as far as I know. This is implemented by many warm and hot wallets as well. And it reduces the risk of you making some mistake where you try to do a custom seed splitting scheme and you forget how it's done. Or, another thing without getting into this, right, is asset inheritance planning. Something happens to you, your family may have a near impossible time ever getting access to their inherited assets if you did something that's non-standard. Whereas if you write down, here's where my seed phrase is located, here's where you can find a copy of my additional passphrase somewhere else, they can get access to it with any wallet.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought up the crypto asset inheritance planning piece. I'm actually going to put a link in the chat about this. So Pamela Morgan, who's one of our board members, has a book called Crypto Asset Inheritance Planning, and she actually talks about some of the issues, challenges, why Shamir secret sharing is not probably a great option for most people. But I think what you said, Josh, is so true. Like sometimes we're like, I'm gonna do this and then this and this, and no one will ever get it. And it's like, yeah, no one is ever gonna get it, including you, because you've created this web of deceit, and you end up deceiving yourself even to figure it out.
Yeah, we have a saying sort of in the software engineering in the security community, which is just don't roll your own crypto. And by crypto, we mean cryptography.
Mhm.
Folks like me, I've been a software engineer professionally for many years now. I love this stuff. I'm just barely scratching the surface of understanding secure cryptography and implementations. So the best thing that you can do, although we're in this community where trustlessness is valued, right, is do listen to and trust the experts, right?
Mhm.
Standards like BIP39, BIP39 passphrases exist for a reason. And the more that you follow secure, well audited standards, the less likely you are to make a mistake that's irreversible.
Yeah, and somebody put in the chat as well asking about what are the risks of using a passphrase. So I want to back up and say that your mnemonic phrase is the 12, 18, 24 words that Josh was just talking about a few minutes ago. Then there's also the PIN, which is like if I was to be carrying around my ledger, which, by the way, I was talking to somebody yesterday from Ledger, and I was like, well, thanks a lot, because now they have all these cool colors. And I'm like, your marketing team is genius. And I hate them because I want every color for the Ledger Nano. Anyways, but so you can lose your blue Ledger. But if they don't have the the PIN, then they can't get on. But this third additional piece of security, a passphrase, is added on top of this. And so this person said, what are the risks of using a passphrase? So Josh, what are the, I guess, benefits versus the risks in your mind for using a passphrase?
So benefits, of course, are it's an extra layer of security if some or all of your seed phrase is compromised, right? So as we always say, you should never give anybody access to your seed phrase, no matter who they claim to be. Very, very rare edge cases where you might share it with an in-person individual. But what the passphrase does is, instead of deriving all of your Bitcoin keys directly from the seed phrase, it derives it from a combination of the seed phrase and the passphrase. So what you can do is, if you're worried about security and say you have your passphrase, your seed phrase stored somewhere, you can store the passphrase somewhere else. And so that's an extra layer where somebody would have to physically compromise both of those things. Of course, the pitfall is this is another piece of data that you must have to access your cryptocurrency. And if you have to be diligent about backing it up and making sure you have a solid access plan for when you need it. So
yeah, and if you put your passphrase in the same place as your seed phrase, that isn't actually providing extra security.
That's right.
But then you shouldn't store them together, but if you're not storing them together, then you have an additional place of storage, and there's that extra piece. And I think a lot of this has to do with how much Bitcoin or crypto you hold, keeping in mind though that it's volatile, and that how much you have one day might mean something very different another day. But also, like, I've heard somebody say, like, he's like, using a custodian, the risk of them screwing up and losing it is less than me. He's like, I don't trust myself. And so you kind of have to figure out what works best for you, and what works best for the amount of cryptocurrency that you hold, as well. So it is kind of like here are recommendations on what's considered safest and most secure, but also, like, do research, and then you're your own person and no one can decide for you what's best. And it's like, it's about having all the information needed and then making a decision or a few different decisions based on your personal habits and personality and behaviors.
Yeah, I agree 100%. For some folks that are very, there are some folks that are much, much more familiar with creating a good passphrase, securing their email, and using app or security key based 2FA. If that's the case for you, you may be better off storing with a custodian, at least until you maybe set the long-term goal of learning how to use a hardware wallet safely. As kind of cliche as a phrase as it is, I always tell people, when it comes to cryptocurrencies and when it comes to keys, with great power comes great responsibility. I mean, it's a fantastic thing that, like, encryption, we have this tool where we can truly hold our own digital money without having to have a bank involved. But we also have to understand that it's completely on us to manage our keys safely and correctly. And in the crypto space, unlike with traditional banking, 99% of the time mistakes are irreversible. So you should take your time, do your homework, do test transactions, test your backups, before you start dealing in any amount of money that would hurt you a lot to lose. That's very individual dependent.
Mm-hmm. And I heard from someone once who was like, well, how can I do test transactions if I don't trust the other person? You can do test transactions with yourself. Create 2 wallets, send it from one address to another, and send it back, and practice so that you become a pro with yourself using very small amounts. I think that's kind of the key. And it is, I think, it's still, whenever you're sending something that's irreversible, it still can be kind of nerve-wracking. But the more you practice and the more comfortable you become with it, the less scary that it is, and the more confident you'll become in using it. I did quickly want to talk about the different type of devices. I know you talked about it briefly, Josh, how there's Trezor, Ledger, KeepKey. There are others as well. But these hardware wallets, can you explain how someone can get them, where they should buy them from? Should they ask me for my old one and have me send it to them, or like, what's the best option?
So the best and most secure way is to buy one of these devices directly from the manufacturer. So these are essentially, again, not to be very technical, but they're little microcomputers. You can think similar to a Raspberry Pi if you've heard of that, but it's a very, very specialized piece of hardware that's just designed to generate keys and sign transactions. And so when we talk about security for these devices, we say buy direct from the manufacturer, because that eliminates the possibility of somebody like a third-party seller from Amazon loading on custom software that could compromise your keys. So we say buy direct from them because these device manufacturers take great care with their sort of supply chains to make sure that when you get that device, it's loaded with safe software that's been vetted by the community and will generate keys that only you, the device owner, will know.
Yeah, and it should be shrink wrapped and just, kind of there's some, Andreas Antonopoulos has a course on how to set up a hardware wallet. Things like that give you an idea of like all the steps to walk through and to look for, make sure it's sealed. I think it's on Trezors, there's a holographic seal over it. Like, is that there? Like, learn the things that should be a part of the wallet that you're getting, and make sure that those exist on it so that you're doing all of the safe things that you can do. And then we've talked about, so you set up your wallet, and then you've got your mnemonic, and we talked a little bit about crypto steel, or putting it on steel. At least, will you explain, Josh, so you've got your private key, you've got 12 words, let's say, for your, Trezor or Ledger. What do you do with that next?
So the next step is to make a physical backup of that seed phrase information. The words should be backed up in a way that they're in order, because order is important with this. So make sure you have numbers with them, or you write them all in a line, and you can make sure that the key data is in the correct order. The other thing is you should have multiple backups of these in safe locations, right? So don't just store your seed phrase in one place on a piece of paper where you might spill water on it. Because if you destroy that one copy of the seed, you would lose access to your cryptocurrency if something were to happen to the device, because the device itself is also storing that information. We have a saying in the tech community: a backup isn't a backup unless it's tested. So at some point, maybe even before you send crypto to the device, or if you do a very small amount, like, whatever a small amount is to you, try doing a factory reset on the device and restoring from your seed phrase backup to make sure that you can do it. Because if something happens to the physical device, it bricks, you lose it, you want to make sure that you know how to restore from backup.
Yep, I think that's really important that you brought that up. And so you've got the device, and you also have your backup, which is that mnemonic phrase somewhere. And then don't just have that in one place, have it in two places and have them secure. And so this doesn't mean like, I'm at my office and I have like one like sitting on my desk here, and then like one's over there on like the table or something, because if something happens to the office, it's gone. If somebody breaks into the office, it's gone. They have both of them. And so putting it somewhere that's tamper resistant in some type of bag, if it's been accessed, having it be someplace that's fireproof, waterproof, all of that. And I've heard people before be kind of like, that seems really like paranoid. And I think it's paranoid. You are preparing for something that could happen. And if you care about the money that you earn, that you work hard for, then it makes sense to me that you'd want to be paranoid. Do what you need to do to make sure that you don't lose something, and that if something happens to you, people can access it later as well, which is the inheritance planning piece. But so let's then talk about, so you can write it on paper, and then you can also, like, paper, obviously, like you were saying, Josh, something can spill, fire, whatnot. So there have been new additional methods that have come into play for storing these private keys, which I will say are not the easiest or most accessible to be able to get it all together, but they are really, really secure.
Yeah. Again, we're talking about it's really critical that your key data remains safe and intact and in order. So what people have come up with is the idea of engraving or using devices where you slide, little stamped out letters into a steel tray, right? So that if your house unfortunately were to burn to the ground and this key data would be exposed to high temperatures or flood or something similar, that the key data would still be readable. And one thing that I wanted to touch on is people often ask, well, this physical stuff, right? These steel things are kind of a pain in the butt, or like paper can catch fire. Can I encrypt my seed phrase and put it on a PC? Can I put it in a secure password manager? Can I put it in a non-encrypted Google Doc? And the answer is a big no. And here's why. The whole security model of these cold storage devices, these offline devices, is this idea that the keys are generated and stored completely offline. So if you were to type your seed phrase for your ledger into your computer, and even if you did securely encrypt it, put it in, a password manager like LastPass or Bitwarden or something, the security of your keys is now only as good as the security of that computer and that password manager. It's not necessarily to say that somebody's immediately going to steal your money if you do that. It's just that you've reduced your security beyond the intended security model of these devices. And so, for example, for warm wallets, like if I have a mobile phone wallet, it's okay to store an encrypted copy of that seed in my passphrase manager. For no wallet of any kind should you ever store your seed phrase in a plain text document or a Google Doc or even something like a screenshot or image, because somebody can write malware that would scan your computer for that kind of information and steal your coins. So
yes, so there are best practices for a reason, and the people that have come up with these best practices are experts. And so if you're wondering if something is a best practice or not, do research, look online, like lop.net. Jameson Lop has a lot of good resources that he links to. But if you're thinking like, okay, Josh says this, and you can see, Jess is nodding along, this must be the right way to go. I say never believe just any one or two people. Back check what we're saying, look and see, well, who else is saying this, what are other options, and kind of look to multiple experts and see what is being suggested rather than just pulling from like one or two people. I will also say that, so the steel devices, doing some of this stuff, it is time consuming, it is a pain. And I had a horrible flood at my house a couple of years ago, and my my keys weren't, my seed phrases weren't in my house, but if they had been in the basement and they'd just been on a piece of paper, like that would have been the end of it. Even if I'd put them in like a safe that I thought was good, like it would have been gone. And so you have to think about all of these things, and like, is it a pain to go and get like a crypto steal and then like find the letter and whatnot? And like, yes, just a quick thing about mnemonic phrases. You don't need the entire word. It's just the first four letters of it, because only the first four letters are different. Like every, like if the word wall is in there, which there's 2048 words, I don't know if that is one of them. Like the word wall, if there's wallet and walleye and something else, like it won't be both. If it's got WALL, you know that those are the first four only. So you don't have to put all of it, but even if it's time consuming, I mean, how much time did you spend earning that money?
yeah, it's way better to take the time now to do best practices than it is to kick yourself and say, I wish I would have done that when you lost your key data. And Jess is absolutely right. The great thing about being in this community is it is a community, and we have experts from all different fields, right? Jess and I both study this from different angles. I always tell people I'm a software engineer that's interested in security. Like, I'm not a security expert, I'm not a security professional. But there's such a broad coalition of people in this space that help each other sort of distill this information. So you don't have to take our word for it, even though I hope we know what we're talking about. I think we do. That you can learn from a lot of different places, not only what the best practices are, but people will be more than happy to tell you why. If there's anything tech folks love, it's saying why you should do something our way. So
I think that's a good point. And like, there are so many experts, like for C4's committees that come together and create like our prep books and whatnot. We've got committee members who disagree about things, but it is objective in that it's like the kind of general consensus about what's true, not what somebody's just like opinion is. And so weigh the information, weigh the facts, look at the experts, find multiple types of information that corroborates the different things, and then I think you'll find that what we're saying is what the experts are saying, and that once you kind of dive in and take these little steps, it'll become easier and easier. And then maybe like a year from now, or 6 months, or 6 weeks, 6 days, who knows, you'll have your own, steel backup, and everything that we're saying here, you're going to have kind of all dialed in. And then the next kind of crypto bull market, the cycle where it goes back up, you're not going to be scrambling in a panic, wondering where you put your seed phrase that you divided up. Who knows what, like, if you do everything the way that you should, take a little bit of extra time, then you'll feel really confident when you get to the point where maybe you do have a significant amount. And I don't know, $5 to me is $5. So I wouldn't want, I don't want to lose $5 even. So I do think that, like, do what makes sense for you though, because I'm sure some people have different opinions on that. But yeah. Anything else you wanted to talk about, Josh, that we haven't covered?
I think just to add on to your last point too, is one piece of advice that I can offer when it comes to security is stay current too. Best practices, especially in cryptocurrency, because the space is so young, have changed significantly over the last 5 to 10 years since the inception of Bitcoin and Ethereum and all these projects. So, keep yourself up to date. There are things that we used to do, like paper wallets, that are now fallen way out of favor when it comes to security, in favor of things like your ledger, your Trezor, seed phrase backup practices. So don't be afraid to keep learning, and just, double check on your backups periodically, once a year, as often as you need to feel comfortable, to make sure that that information is still there, accessible and usable to you. Going back to, a backup isn't a backup unless it's tested. Just, you have to take responsibility for your own keys. And so anything you can do to stay up to date on security information, and to make sure that your setup fits your needs, is important.
I agree with everything you just said. I think that's a good way to end this. So be safe, friends. Follow best practices. And Josh, thank you so much for joining. C4 is lucky to have your expertise and your educational abilities as someone who volunteers with us. So thank you. I appreciate it. And we'll talk to you soon. And if anyone has questions, feel free to put them in the chat. And we'll, or in the comments, and we'll look later. So thank you very much.
Thanks, everyone.